I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds and welcome to my horror house. After the previous video looking at The Burning, I wanted to check out another early slasher, back from a time before the rules, as Scream would lead you to believe them, before the rules had been set in concrete. So I have chosen Prom Night, one of the triumvirate of Jamie Lee Curtis slashers from the late 70s and early 80s, being Halloween, Terror Train and this. I'd say of all three, Prom Night is the lesser of the three. I thought I'd never seen it, so I thought I'd be in for a treat, and as I watched it realised that I think I actually had seen it but had forgotten all about it, which is pretty much the review in capsule that you need there. I think it's the wholesome twin to The Burning's sleazy, skeezy, overtly sexual early slasher. This is the sort of buttoned up, prim and proper slasher, designed very specifically to be a fairly bloodless affair, but also designed with enormous calculation to be a sort of cookie cutter slasher movie, lifting heavily from successful films that had come before it. The real problem I have with Prom Night is that everything it magpies from other films, those other films did better, and it ultimately brings nothing new to the table apart from a really nice end little set piece. By all accounts, the film didn't even have a chance of getting funded until Jamie Lee signed on, and I'm surprised that her or her people showed any interest in this project, because she doesn't really seem to have too much interest in it herself, apart from when she gets to do some moves on the dance floor and show off some of her formal dance training that she had. That's the only real time she seems to come alive in this. She herself even seems to be giving a cookie cutter performance of what a Jamie Lee Curtis performance in a slasher movie is. Everything about it is incredibly familiar if you're fans not only of slasher movies at the time, but also sort of late 90s, early 2000s slashers that came after it, things like Valentine, I Know What You Did Last Summer, because we start off with a flashback, essentially a bunch of kids playing a game of chase or it, although they call it killer, in an abandoned building, a really excellent creepy atmosphere, and kids stalking around shouting, "Killer's gonna get you, killer's gonna get you." It's all nice and tense, and then there's an accident, a tragic, fatal accident, and one of the kids dies. And then we flash forward 6 years, and those kids are now grown up, teenagers on the night of their prom. And of course, the past is going to come back and haunt them, and so we'll begin the slashing. And in no short order, we are treated to a fairly extensive list of suspects, so much so that it starts to feel a little bit Scooby-Doo like. Is it the escaped sexual predator who was incorrectly charged and imprisoned for the death of the little girl at the start of the movie?
Sarge? No.
Is it creepy groundskeeper Mr. Sykes?
Rosemary, the telephone operator? No.
Actually, it's not Scooby-Doo, it's Hong Kong Phooey.
Henry, the mild-mannered janitor? Could be.
There is a long build-up to the night of the prom, and I think it's fair to say that this film could have done with a couple of side murders at about the midpoint. I know that there is a nurse that's killed by this escaped convict, and we see her body, but she's killed off screen. It kind of, if it happens off screen in a slasher, it kind of doesn't count. So after building up this rogues gallery of potential suspects and then nothing happening, it's not so much a whodunit. The film sort of turns into a, when is anyone going to do anything about it? And you have the escaped prisoner coming back to his hometown, which is clearly Halloween. You have a series of menacing phone calls made to the group of kids, now teenagers, who were involved in that death. which is clearly from Black Christmas. You have, for crying out loud, a disco dancing sequence at the prom, which is taken straight out of Saturday Night Fever. And you've also got one of the schoolgirls planning a nasty revenge on the virginal girl, Jamie Lee's character, that she hates while she's being crowned prom queen, which is straight out of Carrie. All of which might have been vaguely interesting if some genius had realised that the tracks that they had intended to use, actual disco tracks from people like Donna Summer and the like, would have actually cost a significant amount of coin. So some poor sod was given 5 days to write original disco tracks for the movie because they didn't have the budget to pay for existing tracks. So you've got everyone jiving and getting down to a song which goes, prom night, everything is alright, prom night, no more feeling uptight, repeat ad nauseum. It's set, by the way, at Alexander Hamilton High School. Tickets to get into that school are like hen's teeth, apparently. And I've seen a couple of the sequels since and know that they're all set at Alexander Hamilton High School. If you want me to talk about some of the prom night sequels, I'll be happy to. You're going to have to let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, I'm just going to skate over them. Funnily enough, for the last video, The Burning, I asked very sincerely what other movies might you find anywhere where you have two girls talking quite earnestly about one of them being unable to decide whether or not to lose her virginity to a certain guy. And the very next movie I put on, Prom Night, has exactly the same conversation going with it. It's a testament in both of these films to how little these supposed rules of slashers have been written in stone at this point. That in both The Burning and Prom Night, it's the girl who turns down the advances and decides to keep her virginity for a little while. You know what, I'm not ready. And gets called out for it, insulted, castigated. It's her that dies. And unlike with The Burning, and something I found quite sweet actually with Prom Night, the counterpoint to this girl sort of saying no and getting killed anyway is one of her friends who's got a date to the prom, the guy, the nerdy guy with the van. They do both lose their virginity on Prom Night, and it's actually presented really quite wholesome and sweet. It's consensual and it's caring. There's no horrible macho posturing. There's no pressuring of one party or the other. It's really quite delightful, and you don't see that often enough. Then they're killed anyway, of course they are. Once we get to Prom Night, the killer actually starts doing his or her stuff. I have some questions at the end of this video, some serious questions about this movie, but they are incredibly spoilerific, so I'll leave that for now. And once the killing gets going, the interest meter sort of edges up, but unfortunately I don't think the skill is there behind the camera to create tension. It's funny because the opening sequence with the kids in the abandoned building, Paul Lynch seems to be able to build up some kind of tension, and I do wonder, having watched the entire rest of the film, whether that's simply because of the repetition of the children's chant of killer's gonna get you, killer's gonna get you. It's something to build on and to edit to. It has a beat and a rhythm to it that slowly grows. Later on in the film, where you have a prolonged chase sequence in the abandoned section of a school, which is a great setting for a slasher chase, a familiar setting suddenly at night and empty, cast as unfamiliar and strange, but it's just a sort of chase that happens. There's no build-up, there's no tension, there's no release. It's something that goes along until it ends. Compare and contrast that to the prolonged stalking and chasing of Laurie Strode at the end of Halloween, and you see John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, absolute masters at creating and building and then releasing and building tension. Sadly, there is none of that in Prom Night, and I think it's probably beyond Paul Lynch's ability. At least that's the impression I got. There is one really good death, a case of mistaken identity, and a sort of grand guignol head rolling down the stage catwalk of the prom, which is really funny. And after that, there's the confrontation on the dance floor, which ends on quite a touching, sympathetic note for the killer. Excellent little cutting back to the children stalking and chanting from the start of the movie, his sort of head ringing with concussion after Jamie Lee's smacked him about the head. And then the film ends. If there had just been enough of the emotional content that we got at the start of the film and the very end of the film, throughout the middle of it, we could have had something quite special, but it just sort of bimbles along after the start setup, biding its time so that it can get to the end bit, which I feel was created first and everything else was sort of added on so that we could get to that bit. Okay, so here are my questions, which will involve spoilers. I've read that there is a TV version of it which includes new scenes and differences, a little bit like maybe the TV edit of Halloween 2, but that doesn't, to my mind, explain some of the gaps. There are clearly missing scenes and missing bits. Groundskeeper Sykes all of a sudden bursts into, one of the suspects no less, bursts into the prom and drunk and screaming, "There's a killer on the grounds, there's a killer on the grounds." What's happened? How does he fucking know? That just happens. Earlier on in the movie, when Jamie Lee's getting ready, her mum comes in. Now we're going to spoil the identity of the killer. Her mum comes in and says, "Have you seen my red lipstick? It's gone missing." No, I haven't. That doesn't get mentioned again until right at the very end, and the killer is revealed, and dun dun dun, it's Jamie Lee's younger brother, whose twin sister was the girl who was killed at the start of the movie. Accidentally killed. He witnessed it and is now taking his revenge. He's also wearing the red lipstick. Where on earth did that come from? There's surely something missing there. Just this weird little nod to gender ambiguity. Is he taking on the persona of his sister to do the killings? What? So many questions. Absolutely no answers. He's randomly wearing his mother's lipstick. What's that about? Does anyone know? Prom Night is certainly, to my mind at least, one of the lesser slashers. It's got a really interesting ending, which almost saves it. Jamie Lee Curtis doesn't save it. Leslie Nielsen in it just seems weird, and I know that there were some scenes cut out where, because he just disappears, even a character says, "Oh, where's Principal whatever his name is?" And you're supposed to have him fingered as a suspect, and there was a scene cut out which, basically, from what I can read, most of the scenes that were cut out were to create even more suspects in a film that's already rammed to the gunnels with suspects. And you'll have seen enough of these movies to know by now that everyone who's put forward as a suspect is not going to be the killer. So it's not really that difficult to finger the killer pretty early on. Of the three slasher movies that Jamie Lee is in this period, Prom Night is easily the bottom of the pile. Terror Train is better. Halloween is the best. I guess if you're going to include Halloween 2, I'd slot that in under Terror Train because I'm not a massive Halloween 2 fan. So all in all, you can tell I'm not exactly a fan. I know there'll be people out there that love Prom Night who want to throttle me, and I'm really sorry about that. But if I want to watch a Prom Night revenge, I'll absolutely watch Carrie over this. If I want to watch a stalking killer harassing his potential victims with obscene and scary phone calls, I'll absolutely watch Black Christmas over this. If I want to see a film where an escaped prisoner has come back to his hometown to continue to kill. Of course I'm going to watch Halloween instead of that, and I'll be absolutely honest with you, if I want to see a film that strongly features disco dancing, I'm going to watch Saturday Night Fever way before I watch Prom Night. It's interesting in as much as it shows, as The Burning did, that these so-called rules of slasher movies were still up for grabs at this time. The model was still being refined, and I actually think that situations where you break out from those rules are more interesting than sticking to the rules themselves. The success of Scream has been a little bit revisionist with regard to the early slasher movies and what they were all about. There are a lot more free-ranging around about this time, and there are a lot of them. And sadly, a lot of them are better than Prom Night.